Welcome back, everyone. This is Susan So Creative, where it's only wrong when it doesn't work. In my continuing series on sergers and Coverhem machines, I pulled a couple of the very basics to make a short video that you will want to save and refer back to often. Locking and removing seams. Either one of these presents its own challenge, especially on a serger or a Coverhem. I wanted to show you some of the basics as far as serger seams go. Now, a lot of you know what a serger seam will actually do. Now, I'm just going to put a couple together here. You've got the knife to the right-hand side, okay? And if you don't want to cut anything up other than whiskers, you will line it with your stitch plate, or line your fabric with your stitch plate, and then just go ahead and continue your seam. Okay, so you finished your seam, but how do you lock the seam at the beginning or the end? Well, if you don't want to do it by machine, you can do it by hand. You can simply do an overhand knot with all the threads. And just tie a knot like so. Now, if you're going to stitch across this seam, you will automatically lock it. So you don't need to lock every single seam on a serger, just your finished seams. In other words, your side seams and so forth that way. Those are your last seams. Now, one note, when you are trying to lock a seam on when you're first starting to do your serger, you're always going to have a tail at the backhand side. You're going to use that to your advantage. So as I start into my seam, I'm going to go just one stitch into the fabric. One, right like so. Now I'm going to raise my presser foot up, and I'm going to take this thread chain that's out the back, and I'm gently going to pull to get the stitches off the little stitch finger. Now the stitch finger, I'm going to open my serger up so you can see it. Your stitch finger is going to be right behind this. See where the threads are all collaborating? Right down here in the very end. And I can see just a couple of the stitches here. Okay, I'm going to use my tweezers to point it out to you. Okay, here are your stitch fingers back in here. You can see where all the extra thread is accumulated back here. This is where the stitches are actually formed. So I'm pulling the threads off those stitch fingers just briefly so that I can pull the thread back underneath my presser foot to stitch directly over top of it. I'm going to lower my presser foot back down. I have to close my door because it won't sew without that. And we're going to overstitch, just overstitch the thread, overstitch the thread that came off the back of the serger, the rest of the chain, and then just trim it off. And that's how you lock your seam on. Now, to lock your seam off, at the end of your seam, I'm going to go one stitch off the edge instead of one stitch in. I'm going to go one stitch off. Yeah, one more. Get it just off the fabric. There we go. Now I'm going to lift the presser foot up so you can get a better look at that. Lift the presser foot up. I'm going to slide the fabric straight back, so just basically just push it straight back off the little stitch fingers. If you need to pull a little thread here to give you a little bit, you can do that. Hear it pop? Popped right off. Now I'm going to flip this fabric toward me. So I'm now going to stitch on the other side of that seam. And we're just going to make sure this is nice and flat. So I'm not going to trim anything off. So I'm going to stay back away from my knife, and I'm just going to stitch over that seam that I just completed, and then off the side. And there's how you finish your seam. You can see where I don't have an extra loop of thread up there because I pulled those stitches just a little bit. And same thing with the beginning. I don't have a big lump of thread there. If I gotten a few more stitches off of that, I wouldn't have even what's showing. So that's how you end and start by locking your serger seams. Okay, I have a seam here I want to remove. How do you remove a serger seam? Here I've made the mistake of putting my wrong sides together instead of my right side. So I still need this piece for my project, so I'm going to simply remove these stitches. And to do that, there are a couple things you can do with it. My favorite way is to go through and just take your seam ripper so you can simply rip the seam. You don't take it out like you do a normal sewing machine seam. So we're just going to rip this like so. And the more of this I rip, I'm releasing all of the threads just by clipping that one thread. So now if I go over here, this is back to the right side, you can see where those threads simply pull completely off. I got a couple little threads there that I didn't quite catch. There we go. And your seam comes out. And your threads come completely away. So you don't have any there, and you're now able to go back and put the seam together correctly. Another way you can take out a serger seam is pick up your needle threads, and just rip the needle threads every so often, and then your stitches will pull out as well. So it's just a matter of going through here, and because now the needle threads will come completely out because there's nothing holding them. And then the serger loops come off. So there's two ways in which to remove a serger seam. Once you've gotten your cover hem stitch to the end, I'm going to raise my needle to the highest position, raise my presser foot, then I'm going to take a long tool, I've used a stylus, you can use your tweezers, and pull my needle threads towards me, like so. So I've got about 3 or 4 inches there. Okay, you want to have extra thread between the needles and where you're going to cut, because I am going to cut this off, but I want to make sure I have at least 2 inches of thread from the needles. Okay, once I've got that done, I'm going to take my fabric and I'm going to hold the fabric between my thumb and my first finger, and I'm going to hold the seam, and then I'm going to pull my threads or my fabric to the left. Now what that did, you see that? The needle threads are gone. They've been pulled to the back side. Now I can cut my looper thread, and I've secured my seam. So at this point I can go ahead and lock this off either by knotting it, seam sealant, either knotting it, seam sealant, or weaving the threads back underneath the seam. But I've just locked my seam in place. Now if you're doing it in the round, it's a little different. This time I'm going to start in the middle as if we were doing a round. And just get the first sewing. And give myself a little thread here. Okay. A little more. All right, and we're going to cut it. Now, if I were doing an actual round seam, now I've just got one piece started so that you can see. So here's would be my beginning of my seam. So as I'm coming back around, I want to make sure that I've lined up my seam correctly so that when I come up to this seam, I'm going to overstitch slightly right into the same line for a few stitches, like so, and then repeat the process I just showed you by raising the needles to the highest position, raising my presser foot up, taking my stylus, bringing it from the back of the presser foot towards the front, pulling my needle threads forward, and again give yourself about 5 inches. I lost one of the threads. There we go. So that I have 2 inches from the needle and 2 inches that's going to be attached to the thread or to the fabric, and then I'm going to cut it. Again, go back in here and grab your seam and pull to the left, and then clip your looper thread. Okay, now I got a couple stitches that are out of line there, but that's how you're going to end off your in the round. These stitches here can be pulled to the back side, or you can trim them away because you've overstitched the seam so it's not going to come out. And that's how you're going to do in the round. Another way to finish off a cover hem seam, if your serger or cover hem allows it, is to chain off, keeping attention. You want to keep attention on the fabric to the back. Don't pull, just keep the threads taut. Chain off a considerable amount. Cut it. And then you can just an overhand knot on the end. You can also thread these stitches back underneath your seam, okay, with a hand needle. I prefer to do everything at my machine and use my machine to end or start my seams, as opposed to using anything with an H in the beginning. So, but that's how I end my seams. Again, if you're going to cross stitch this over, or cross seam it, I should say, over, using your serger or the cover hem again, by folding it back under and creating a hem on that, you can go ahead and do that. You don't need to finish or lock off the seam. Now, to remove a cover hem seam, I'm just going to cut that knot off that we just created and get rid of that. I'm looking at the back side of my seam. This is my top of my seam. The back side of my seam is here. And depending upon which end of the seam that I'm working on, I should be able to pull one thread get this loop out of there, and I can pull one thread because there's only one looper, and I can totally remove that seam. And then on the top side, your needles just lift off. Don't forget to hit that like and the follow button and save this video for future reference. And I'll see you next time on Susan So Creative, where it's only wrong when it doesn't work.